in the merciless center of the Old West, where the wind carried the voices of the dead and the sand buried truths. No one dared to speak. A lone woman stood on the edge of a life about to be torn apart and forged anew by the fiercest storm in a generation. Lorne Calder believed she had already faced her hardest trials, the dust, the isolation, the endless silence. But the storm hammering her homestead carried more than grit and darkness. It delivered a man shattered and bleeding, a warrior whose very existence was a crime in this land. By pulling him from death, she condemned herself. This was not merely a tale of endurance. It was the story of how a single merciful choice could spark violence, and how a vow spoken under siege could grow into a bond strong enough to defy hatred itself. That wind was no force of nature. It was alive. It tore at the sawed walls of Lorne Calder's cabin, screaming like something feral and starving, driving shards of sand through every hairline crack in the windows and beneath the door. A fine cutting grit coated the rough table, the iron stove, the thin blanket on her narrow cot. Beyond the walls, the world had been erased. The sky, once an endless blue, had become a boiling mass of brown and rust. The sun no longer existed. This was Lorne's world, a stubborn mark of resistance carved into the indifferent sprawl of the Arizona Territory. 2 years earlier, fever had taken her father Thane Calder, leaving her with a modest ranch, a dozen tough cattle, a deep well, and a will hardened by grief. That stubborn resolve was the only true inheritance he'd left behind. At 24, she carried her father's steady hands and her mother's sharp green eyes, along with a resilience shaped by loss and necessity. In the nearest settlement, a wind-scoured excuse for a town called Redemption, people whispered about the Calder woman. A few called her brave. Most called her foolish. Lorne didn't listen. Solitude followed her like a shadow, but it was a pain she understood. It was better than the sidelong stares and hollow concern offered by Redemption's townsfolk. Out here the land answered only to her. Seasons ruled. Soil demanded. Nothing else mattered. But this storm obeyed no order. It was the third day of unbroken fury. Her cattle huddled in the lean-to she and her father had built years ago, and she had enough food and water to endure if endurance was all the storm required. Still, the constant howl gnawed at her nerves. It wasn't the noise alone. It was the crushing sense of being the last living thing in a world stripped bare by wind. Late that afternoon, as daylight faded into something darker and heavier, she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the storm. A dull, measured ood struck the western wall of the cabin. Thump! Silence. Thump! Her pulse slammed in her ears. At first she thought it was debris wood roofing, but the sound carried weight, intention. She reached for the Winchester by the wall, the steel cool in her grip, familiar and grounding. Keeping the door barred, she edged toward the lone window facing the gale. Wiping dust from the inside pane, she stared into the chaos. Visibility stretched no farther than 10 feet. The world twisted in a blinding spiral of sand. Then something took shape. A man. What remained of one dragged himself forward on hands and knees, his body a dark smear against the storm. She watched as he lurched once more, his shoulder striking the sawed wall with a hollow thud. Then he collapsed unmoving. Every instinct told her to turn away. He could be a drifter, a killer, trouble-given flesh. In this country, mercy was a luxury few survived. Yet leaving another soul to be stripped down to bone by sand, steps from her door, was a line she could not cross. Doing so would betray everything her father had taught her. Drawing a breath that shook her ribs, her fingers whitening around the rifle, Lorne went to the door. It took all her strength to lift the bar and haul the door inward against the storm's brutal force. Sand exploded into the cabin, stinging her skin and blinding her eyes. Shielding her face, she stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. The man lay face down, clothes shredded, dark hair tangled with blood and grit. As she closed the distance, she saw it, The feathered end of an arrow shaft lodged high in his back. Her chest tightened. This was no wanderer. He was Knox. The truth struck hard. In this territory, the war between settlers and the Knox was fresh and raw. A warrior found near a homestead summoned possessed not compassion. To help him would be called betrayal. To hide him was a sentence of fire or rope. The people of Redemption, under the grip of cattle baron Varrick Morrow, would show no restraint. They would burn her out, or worse. The wind tore at her dress, whipped her hair across her face as she stood frozen. The man groaned a low, broken sound torn from deep within his chest. He was alive. Lorne looked from his shattered body to the endless, merciless storm. She remembered her father once setting a wolf's broken leg because he could not bear to watch suffering go unanswered. And in that moment she knew the storm outside was not the greatest danger she faced. She glanced back at the cold, empty cabin and the stretch of solitude that lay ahead. At that moment her choice was not about safety versus danger. It was about who she truly was and whether she would let the world shape her into someone she was not. Cursing her own foolish, compassionate heart, Lorne Calder sank to her knees. With a grunt of effort, she rolled the man over. His face was sharp, angular, streaked with grime and dried blood. Even unconscious, his features spoke of iron resolve. His breathing came in shallow, pained rattles. The arrow had to come out. She could not lift him. He was a dead weight of muscle and bone. Gritting her teeth, she grasped him under the arms and began dragging him inch by agonizing inch from the storm into the shelter of her cabin. The door slammed behind them, plunging the room into dusty twilight and muffling the wind's shriek into a low roar. Panting, aching, Lorne stared down at the wounded Kael, lying sprawled on her floor. The storm raged outside, but she knew with a chill that cut to her marrow that the real tempest was now inside. For the first 24 hours he hovered between life and the shadow of death. Lorne worked with desperate focus. Her father Thane Calder had taught her rudimentary medicine, and she applied every lesson with trembling precision. She stripped away his deerskin shirt, pausing only for a heartbeat at the sight of his lean, muscled torso marked with white scars. Each line told a story she could not read, a testament to a life carved by hardship and battle. The arrow remained the most urgent threat. It lodged deep in the fleshy part of his shoulder, narrowly missing bone. Breaking the shaft was easy. Forcing the arrowhead through was brutal, bloody work that made her stomach churn. In delirium, he emitted a sharp guttural sound in a language she could not comprehend, arching in pain. She whispered soft nonsense, the same words she used to calm a skittish horse, her voice low against the storm's roar. Once she had cleaned and stitched the wound as best she could, fever took hold. It raged through him, turning his skin to fire, twisting his unintelligible murmurs into desperate pleas. She spent the following day and night tending him, bathing his forehead with cool water, forcing sips of willow bark tea between cracked lips, sitting vigil by his cot, with the Winchester never far from hand. By lamplight, she studied his face. Without grime and blood, his features were striking: a strong jaw, proud straight nose, wide mouth, twisted in pain. He was younger than she had guessed, perhaps no older than herself. The sandstorm broke on the 5th day as abruptly as it had begun. One afternoon, the storm's howling ceased, leaving a heavy silence. The landscape outside was remade, softened into unfamiliar dunes. Immediate danger had passed, but the peril of his presence had only begun. He stirred that afternoon. Lorne was by the hearth stirring thin broth when she felt his eyes on her. She turned slowly. He was awake. Kael's dark, intelligent eyes bore into her with wary, feral intensity. No delirium lingered, only sharp, assessing clarity. He tried to sit, inhaling sharply and hissing through his teeth as the movement tugged at his stitches. "Easy," she said, softly, voice ringing in the still cabin. "Don't move. You'll tear the wound." He did not understand the words, but he understood the intent. He settled back, gaze never leaving hers, being watched by a man who was equal parts predator and wounded animal unnerved her. She brought the bowl of broth closer and held it out. He stared then at her, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "Just broth," she murmured, sipping herself to prove it was safe. His expression held, but after a long moment, he gave a curt nod. She helped him sit, bracing his good shoulder. The brief touch sent a strange warmth through her, separate from healing, the startling reality of contact after so long. He drank slowly, deliberately, focus absolute. The days that followed became a quiet, cautious dance of necessity and mistrust. They did not speak. His language was a mystery. English was foreign to him. Communication was gestures and expressions, a nod for yes, a shake for no, an upturned palm for water, a flat hand to stop. He was a model patient in his movements. Fiercely independent, he resisted help whenever possible. He observed her routines, watching her milk the single cow, tend the garden, and repair the corral damaged by the storm. His quiet scrutiny unnerved her more than any threat. One evening, as she cleaned his wound, tracing the angry red lines of stitches, he spoke. His voice rough, unused the word, foreign, pointing at his chest. Kael said, "Kael." She looked at him, startled. It was the first time he had given anything of himself a name. It sounded like something out of the West, which was odd, but she didn't question it. She tapped her own chest. "Lorne." He repeated it, the syllables strange on his tongue, soft yet deliberate. Lorne, a flicker of something, almost a smile, softening the hard lines in his eyes, passed across his face. It was a beginning. A week after the storm, his strength was steadily returning. He could walk now, moving with stiffness, yet regaining a fluid, natural grace. One morning he grabbed a chunk of charcoal from the hearth and began sketching on a smooth scrap of wood. He drew 3 men on horseback, faces cruel and blurred. One held a rifle. Then he sketched himself falling, an arrow lodged in his shoulder. He pointed first at the drawing, then at his own wound, his expression grim. Lorne felt her stomach twist. He had not been hurt in a raid or skirmish. He had been ambushed, hunted. Then he drew a simple brand on a horse's saddle, and her blood ran cold, the sickening mark of Varrick Morrow. Varrick Morrow, the most feared man in the territory, known for his brutality and open hatred of the Knox, the man who coveted her land. Kael met her gaze, dark eyes searching, trying to see if she understood. She did too well. The man she had saved was a direct enemy of the man who could crush her with a single command. She had not brought a random threat into her home. She had harbored the target of a predator, painting the same target on herself. The silence in the cabin grew heavy, laden with the weight of a secret that could kill them both. Dust from the storm hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Kael's drawing confirmed Lorne's deepest fears. This was no accident. It was conspiracy, and she was caught squarely in the middle. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside, spiked her anxiety anew. Redemption lay a day's ride away, yet Varrick Morrow's shadow stretched across the territory like a living, malignant thing. 2 weeks after the storm, as Kael began to move freely, the shadow fell across her doorway. Lorne was outside repairing a section of fence, battered by wind, when riders appeared as dark specks on the horizon. Her heart hammered in her chest. 3 of them. She recognized the massive figure in the lead, immediately Varrick Morrow. He rode a magnificent black stallion, leather saddle, polished, tailored coat, immaculate, a stark contrast to the rugged West itself. He sought control, domination, bending both land and people to his will. Lorne hissed at Kael, seated on the porch carving wood, with the knife she had given him. "Stay away from the window," he warned, eyes locking with hers, cold and dangerous. Kael understood instantly. Without a word, he slipped inside, silent despite his size. Lorne forced a slow, steadying breath, leaning on the fence post as though she had all the time in the world. She would not let him see fear. He rode to the fence, two of his hired men flanking him, rough-faced, dusty eyes full of menace. Varrick Morrow dismounted, moving with the smooth confidence of a man born to the saddle. Handsome in a cruel, imposing way, his neatly trimmed beard framed piercing blue eyes, a smile that never touched them. "Miss Calder," he said, voice a low, smooth baritone dripping with condescension. He tipped his hat in mock courtesy. "Glad to see you intact after that nasty storm." Lorne answered, voice cool even. "I handle what comes. Just checking on my neighbors." He smiled, gesturing expansively at the land. "This is a lonely, dangerous place for a woman. On her own," he said. The lie was insulting in its obviousness. "My father and I built this place to last," she replied firmly. "I'm not easily worried." His smile tightened. He walked the fence line, hand-gloved, brushing over the wood. "Your father clung to this land like gold in a treasury, but he's gone. This land needs a firm hand, not for domestic pursuits." He looked pointedly at her small garden. "I'm prepared to renew my offer," he said smoothly. "A generous one, enough to see you settled in a home, Miss Calder." "It's not for sale," she said, voice firm, leaving no room for argument. His eyes cold as winter ice locked onto hers. The pretense of politeness evaporated. "Everything's for sale, girl. It's only a matter of price or persuasion. There are dangers out here. You can't fight with a fence post," he added, voice low. "Renegade knocks, for instance. I hear some were pushed from the canyons by the storm. My men and I are doing our part to clear the area. It'd be a tragedy if a lone homesteader got caught in the crossfire." The threat was clear velvet glove over iron fist. He was telling her his protection came at a price, her land. And if she refused, that protection could become the very danger he promised. "I'm sure the law appreciates your civic-mindedness," Lorne said, hand inching toward the hatchet she'd been using on the fence. One of his men, a lanky cowboy named Braddock Keen with a greasy look, spat a stream of tobacco near her boots. "The law mumbles around here, Mr. Morrow," he sneered. Varrick Morrow raised a hand, silencing him. "My man is crude but not wrong. Russ Calderon in Redemption understands the practicalities of keeping peace. Now about my offer. I've given you my answer." Her tone cut through the quiet. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, gaze so intense. It felt like a physical weight pressing on her. He was assessing her, weighing her resolve. From the corner of her eye, Lorne caught the slightest twitch of the cabin curtain. Kael was watching, listening. Finally, Varrick Morrow's chilling smile returned. "Very well, have it your way. But when you tire of playing rancher, you know where to find me." He swung back into his saddle, pausing to scan the homestead one last time, eyes lingering on the lean-to sheltering her cattle. "You keep a tidy place, I'll give you that. But solitude can play tricks on the mind, make you foolish, make you charitable to those who deserve none." With that, he spurred his horse, and he and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a palpable sense of menace. Lorne didn't move until they were mere specks. Her body trembled not from fear, but from a surge of defiant anger. She turned back inside. Kael stood by the table, body rigid, jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. The knife he'd been carving was in his hand, knuckles white. His eyes burned with pure, distilled hatred. He had understood every veiled threat from Varrick Morrow. He knew the man who had tried to kill him was the same man now threatening her. Their battles had merged into one. The days after Morrow's visit were thick with tension. The threat was no longer distant. It had a face and a name. Lorne scanned the horizon constantly, rifle always within reach. Kael had changed too, the quiet patience of his recovery replaced by restless energy. He pushed himself harder, testing the limits of his healing shoulder, regaining the lethal grace she had glimpsed before. He was a warrior preparing for battle, knowing what was coming. Their silent communication deepened, nuanced. He taught her simple skills, tracking a rabbit, by faint signs reading clouds for rain, moving through brush without sound. In return, she taught him English, pointing at objects and saying their names clearly. Water, fire, bread, gun. He learned fast, mind sharp, hungry for knowledge, pronunciation careful. In their small cabin, an unspoken alliance was forged against a shared enemy. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side, tending the homestead. The loneliness that had haunted Lorne for 2 years faded, replaced by a partnership that was comforting and terrifying. She found herself watching him, admiring the focused intensity he brought to every task, the quiet strength radiating from him. A dangerous warmth stirred in her chest, a feeling long buried. But their isolated world could not last. Supplies were dwindling, and a trip to redemption was unavoidable. Lorne wrestled with the choice. Leaving Kael alone was risky, but taking him along seemed impossible. They agreed it was a necessary risk. She would go swift and careful, betraying nothing. Kael gave her a warning before she left, his English halting, but meaning crystal clear. Town, he said, dark eyes serious. Watch. Listen, people smile with teeth of a snake. The town of redemption appeared just as she remembered, a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon, a general store, and the sheriff's office. The air was thick with gossip and suspicion. As she tied her horse outside Varrick Morrow's mercantile, the familiar weight of prying eyes pressed on her. The lone woman from the Calder homestead was an object of endless curiosity. Inside the store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and dried apples. Varrick Morrow, the proprietor, greeted her with a watery smile, portly, thinning hair and a perpetually nervous air, eager to please. "Miss Calder, good to see you. We were worried after that storm," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "We weathered it fine, Mr. Crow," Lorne replied, handing over her list. "I need flour, salt coffee, and cartridges for a Winchester." As Halvor gathered her goods, he made small talk. "It must get terribly lonely out there, all by yourselves. You're brave holding on to that place. Mr. Morrow," he continued quietly, leaning closer. "He has a powerful interest in consolidating the ranches in these parts. For the good of the territory, you understand, protection. I protect myself just fine," Lorne said, coolly. Halvor's eyes darted around the store. He lowered his voice. "Be careful, miss. These are dangerous times. Morrow Brand's men were in here yesterday buying up all the whiskey. They spoke of cleansing the land of Knock's filth for good. Said some might be hiding near your property." A cold knot tightened in Lorne's stomach. Was he warning her or fishing for information? She kept her expression neutral. "The only thing on my property is cattle, Mr. Crow." Her hand remained steady as she paid, despite the tremor inside. As she prepared to leave, Halvor stopped her. "One more thing, Miss Calder," he said, smile tight, almost a grimace. "I noticed you're buying more salted pork and beans than usual. Expecting a long winter." The question sounded casual, yet felt accusatory. Her purchases were for one, but perhaps he suspected preparations for two. "I don't like trips to town more than necessary," she replied evenly, heart pounding. She left the store feeling the weight of Halvor's gaze like a hand pressing against her back. She loaded her supplies and rode out of redemption, unease settling deep. Kael's warning echoed, teeth of a snake. The twist of the knife hit her mid-ride. Varrick Morrow was no mere gossip. His mercantile was failing, and everyone knew Varrick Morrow held the note. The shopkeeper wasn't a friend offering a veiled warning. He was a spy, a desperate man, in Morrow's pocket reporting every move. Her extra provisions, so small, became the evidence he needed. She had walked right into the trap. When she returned to the homestead, the sun hung low, painting clouds in blood and fire. Kael met her at the door, lifting the heavy saddlebags. He read her face instantly. "Trouble," she said, tasting ash in her mouth. "They know." I don't know how she explained, recounting her encounter with Varrick Morrow, the subtle questions, the remark about food. Kael listened, expression darkening with each word. He moved to the window, peering over the darkening landscape. No longer a refuge, the land now looked like a battlefield. "He is not the snake," Kael said, voice low and dangerous. "He is the rattle. The snake is coming." The attack arrived 3 days later at dawn. The first sign was not sound but a tremor in the earth, the distant thunder of a dozen horses ridden hard. Kael was the first to sense it. He rose from his cot in the pre-dawn gloom, silent as a shadow, a predator sending danger on the wind. He touched Lorne Calder's shoulder and she woke instantly, heart lurching at the grim urgency in his eyes. "They come." He whispered the 2 words, a death knell in the hushed cabin. Together they pressed against the window, eyes locked on a rising plume of red dust against the pale dawn sky, growing larger by the second. Riders, at least 10, led by Varrick Morrow. They weren't approaching like a posse looking to ask questions. They rode like a war party. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw up Lorne Calder's throat, but she forced it down. Her father hadn't raised a coward. "Bar the doors, grab the rifles," she said, voice tight but steady. They moved with frantic precision. Lorne slammed the heavy wooden bar across the door, while Kael shuttered the 2 small windows, plunging the cabin into near darkness, pierced only by thin slivers of growing daylight through the firing slits Thane Calder had built into the walls. They had 2 rifles, her Winchester and her father's old Springfield, and a single pistol. Ammunition was scarce. The riders circled the cabin, their hoots and hollers echoing like vultures in the morning air. Lorne Calder, Varrick Morrow's voice boomed, magnified by the still dawn. "You harbor a fugitive and a murderer. Send out the Apache savage, and you will not be harmed." Lorne looked at Kael. His face was a mask of calm, deadly focus. He checked the Springfield hand's steady movements, precise. "No fear," he murmured, voice low, eyes meeting hers in the gloom. "He lies. He wants the land. We are the excuse," she thought, knowing he was right. Surrender wasn't an option. For Kael it meant a rope. For her it meant losing everything, and she would not give Morrow the satisfaction. "I know you're in there." "Filth," another voice shouted, thick with hate. Braddock's keen, Morrow's greasy-haired enforcer spat near the cabin. "We'll burn you out and scalp you like you did those settlers at Willow Creek." The first shot splintered the door. The siege had begun. Hours blurred into smoke noise and adrenaline. Lorne and Kael moved as one. He was the strategist, instincts honed by a lifetime of war. He directed her where to watch, when to fire, and when to hold. "One shot, one man," he murmured, a mantra amidst chaos. "Waste nothing." Lorne, accustomed only to hunting game and scaring coyotes, discovered a well of iron resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She fired through the slits, shoulder-aching gunpowder stinging her nostrils. She was no longer defending a cabin. She was defending the man beside her, the quiet, honorable warrior who had been hunted and left for dead. Morrow Brand's men were arrogant, confident. They charged on horseback, whooping and firing wildly, expecting to crush the cabin with sheer force. But the sod walls held, and Kael's tactics were flawless. They fired sparingly, but with deadly precision, taking riders off horses, sowing confusion. 2 of Morrow Brand's men went down screaming in panic. The attackers faltered, realizing this would not be easy. They adjusted, taking cover behind rocks, and the corral steadily hammering at the cabin. Bullets thudded into walls, a relentless percussion. A stray shot tore through the south shutter, whistling past Lorne's head, embedding in the wall behind her. She flinched, but stayed her ground. "They'll try fire next," Kael said during a lull, eyes scanning the terrain. When the sun climbed and the wind shifted, he was right. Midday, Braddock's Keen and another man crept forward under cover of the lean-to, carrying torches. "I'll stop them," Kael said. He moved to the other side of the cabin to a firing slit with a clear angle. Resting the Springfield on the sill, breathing slow and even, he was no longer just a man. He was an extension of the weapon in his hands. Still as stone, he waited as the 2 men dashed from cover. Kael fired once. The shot was perfect. Braddock dropped the torch, crumpling to the ground, clutching his leg. The other man hesitated a half-second too long. Lorne fired the Winchester. The torch went out, and he fell backward in the dust. The attackers unleashed a furious volley, but the immediate threat of fire was gone. The battle had forged a new intimacy. In the crucible of the siege, all barriers of culture and language burned away. Two people fought for life for each other. In quiet moments between volleys, their eyes met across smoke-filled space, a depth of understanding and reliance beyond words. No longer were they simply a woman and an Apache. They were Lorne Calder and Kael, a single unit, bound by blood and gunpowder. Together, they would live or die inside this small sod cabin under the relentless Arizona sun. As afternoon bled into a tense twilight, a wounded quiet settled over the homestead. The relentless barrage of gunfire had dwindled to sporadic echoes. Varrick Morrow and his men had pulled back, licking their wounds and likely plotting their next move. 2 of their men lay dead, and at least 2 more, including Braddock's Keen, were wounded. But Lorne and Kael knew it wasn't a retreat. It was the calm before a final devastating storm. Inside, the air reeked of burnt gunpowder and stale sweat. Lorne's shoulder throbbed deeply, ears ringing. She reloaded the Winchester with trembling fingers. Her cartridges were down to a precious few. Hope was scarce. Kael moved to her side, a solid anchor in the terrifying quiet. He handed her a canteen. She drank deeply lukewarm water, soothing her parched throat. "They'll wait for full dark," he said low and rumbling. "Then they'll come, all of them, with fire." She nodded, the grim truth settling in her gut. They couldn't hold out through the night. The cabin, their fortress, might become their tomb. A wave of despair, held at bay all day, threatened to crash over her. "We did well," she whispered. "We fought them." "We fight," he corrected gently. "Still not over." His gaze lingered on her face in the fading light, filtering through bullet holes and cracks. He saw the exhaustion, the fear she tried to hide beneath a mask of courage. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The calloused tips of his fingers against hers sparked a tender shock amid the violence. "You are not just a fighter," he murmured. "You have the heart of a warrior, Lorne." Tears welled hot and sudden. "My father would have said I have the foolishness of Calder." "No, it is courage," he insisted. He sank beside her on the floor, back against the wall rifle, resting across his knees. For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the dying day. In that fragile moment, death lurking outside, he finally shared the rest of his story. His English broken, yet his meaning sharp as obsidian. He spoke of his people, the Knox, driven from their ancestral land. He did not describe himself as a raider, but as a protector, a scout for a small band of families, elders, women and children, seeking safe passage to the mountains. Morrow Brand's men were not a posse, Kael explained, voice laced with cold ancient anger. "They are hunters. For days they follow us. We lead them away from our families." He and 3 other warriors had acted as decoys, drawing Morrow Brand's men into a long, deadly chase. They trapped them in a box canyon, not a fight, a slaughter. His eyes grew distant, haunted. "My brothers fell. I took the arrow meant for another. I fell from my horse into the river. The current carried me. I walked for a long time. Then the storm came." Lorne finally grasped the full horror. Kael was not some random Knox caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was the sole survivor of a calculated massacre orchestrated by Varrick Morrow, meant to clear the land. His presence in her cabin was no coincidence. It was the direct consequence of the same ruthless greed now aiming to destroy her. Their fates had been intertwined long before she found him in the sandstorm. "He will not stop," she whispered, chills running through her. "As long as you live, you are witness to what he did." "And you?" Kael added, locking eyes with hers. You are witness to what he is." The finality pressed down on them. There was no escape. Outside, the first stars pierced the bruised purple sky. In the enemy camp, a flicker of growing fire marked preparation. In that profound, terrible stillness, Kael turned to her, took her hand, his larger one enveloping hers completely. Lorne Calder began, voice carrying a solemn weight she had never heard before. "I have walked a path of loss. My family, my brothers, all gone. I was ready to meet them. On the wind," he continued. "But then I found this place. I found you." His gaze swept the battered cabin. "This is a good home. You have a strong heart. In my world, when a warrior gives his word, it is bound to his spirit," Kael said, squeezing her hand, dark eyes locking onto hers, a vow unbroken even in the chaos surrounding them. "It cannot be broken, not even in death. If we see the morning sun," he swore, voice resonating like an oath sworn before God. She didn't know. "I promise you this. You will never be alone again. Where you go, I will go. Your fight will be my fight. Your home will be my home. You will never ever walk alone again." A single tear traced through the grime on Lorne's cheek. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking promise she had ever heard, a future whispered in the shadow of imminent death. Yet in that moment, it was everything. It was hope. It was love. It was a reason to fight to the last breath. Outside, darkness had become complete, a thick, impenetrable black. Fires from Varrick Morrow's camp cast long, flickering shadows, making the rocks seem alive and threatening. The air pulsed with anticipation. The final assault was coming. "They expect us to wait," Kael murmured, mind already, calculating how to survive a cage of fire. But a cornered wolf is most dangerous when it strikes. A desperate, audacious plan began to form. It was a gamble of colossal risk, their only chance to survive. They would not wait for fire. They would meet their enemy on their own terms. Kael knew the land not from ownership but observation. In his weeks of recovery, he had studied every ridge, every ravine around the homestead with a warrior's eye. He pointed toward a narrow, rock-strewn wash half a mile west. "There," he said. "We make our stand there." Their plan was twofold. First, a diversion. They gathered every spare blanket and scrap of cloth, soaking them in the last kerosene from the lamps. While Lorne loaded the remaining ammunition and supplies, Kael slipped out the back under cover of darkness, movements silent as a ghost. He became one with the landscape, using every rock and shadow for concealment. Lorne waited, heart drumming against her ribs, each minute stretching into an hour. Then a sudden burst of orange light erupted near the corral. Kael had set the small haystack ablaze. Shouts of surprise and confusion rang out from Morrow Brand's camp. The diversion worked. Half of Morrow's men, believing it a desperate escape attempt, galloped toward the fire. That was her cue. Lorne slipped out the cabin's front door, low to the ground, sprinting west toward the wash. Moments later, Kael appeared at her side, emerging from the darkness, as if from the earth itself. Adrenaline fueled their flight, chaos fading behind them. The deep, dry ravine with steep, rocky sides was a perfect trap. Lorne took a high position between two large boulders, commanding a clear view of the entrance. Kael melted into shadows opposite her. They laid out their remaining ammunition, maybe 20 rounds between them. It had to be enough. They didn't wait long. Varrick Morrow, furious at being outmaneuvered, led his remaining 5 men directly toward the wash, correctly guessing it was the only escape route. Arrogant and overconfident, he charged headlong. Kael and Lorne let the first 2 riders pass the entrance. Then Kael gave a piercing cry, a hawk's shriek, echoing off the canyon walls. It was the signal. Lorne rose and fired. Her shot brought down the 3rd rider's horse, throwing the man into dust. Kael fired a split second later. The 4th man clutched his chest and tumbled from the saddle. Chaos erupted in the narrow space, horses panicked, rearing and screaming. Morrow and his remaining men were trapped. Forward or back was impossible. Spread out! Find them! Varrick. Morrow roared fury in his voice. He dismounted, taking cover behind his horse, firing wildly. The battle had shifted from siege to a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the rocks. Lorne and Kael held the advantage of position and surprise. They fired sparingly, making every shot count, shifting positions after each one to give the illusion of greater numbers. One by one, Morrowbrand's men felt their greed and hatred snuffed out in the Arizona dust. Finally, only one remained, Varrick Morrow. Pinned down, his horse gone, his bravado stripped bare, leaving only a core of vicious, cornered desperation. "Come out, you savage!" he screamed, voice cracking. "Come face me like a man!" Instead, Kael stepped from the shadows behind him, carrying no rifle, only the knife in his hand. Morrow spun, eyes wide with shock, firing his pistol. The shot went wild. Before he could fire again, Kael was on him. The fight was brutal, primal, and swift. Morrow was powerful, but Kael was a warrior, fighting for his past, his future, and the woman who had saved him. With swift, precise movements, he disarmed Morrow. "This is for my brothers," Kael snarled English, sharp with venom, pressing the knife to Morrow's throat. "Wait!" Lorne called, climbing down from her perch. She stepped forward, Winchester steady. Death is too easy for him. She looked down at the cowering cattle baron, the man who had terrorized her and murdered for land. He was no longer a figure of power, just a craven, pathetic bully. They bound him with his own ropes. As the sun rose, painting the canyon walls in soft pastels, they found the proof they needed in Morrow's saddlebags, a letter from a corrupt land office official outlining the illegal seizure of Knox lands. Evidence of conspiracy. They marched him back to redemption, not as conquerors, but as survivors. The sight of Varrick Morrow bound and beaten, led by the woman from the Calder homestead, and a formidable Knox warrior stunned the town into silence. Halvar Crow turned pale, attempting to slip away, but Kyle's cold gaze pinned him in place. With the letter as proof and testimony from Morrowbrand's wounded men, the law represented by a visiting Amon Price had no choice but to act. The Baron's reign of terror was over. Weeks later, a fragile peace settled over the homestead. The cabin bore the scars of siege, but it was whole. It was home. Lorne stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. The land was hers now, free from threats, no longer lonely or empty. Kael came to stand beside her, taking her hand fingers intertwining with hers. The vow whispered in the shadow of death had become the reality spoken in shared chores, quiet evenings, and the profound comfort of presence. He had found a home, and she had found the one who would ensure she never walked alone again. Their future was as vast and uncertain as the western sky, but they would face it together. The story of Lorne Calder and Kael reminds us that even in the harshest landscapes, courage and compassion endure. Love is not only found in quiet moments, but forged in the fire of adversity, and a single promise can change a life forever. If their story of survival, love, and justice moved you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who cherishes tales of the human spirit, triumphing against all odds. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of drama, romance, and unbreakable bonds. Many more stories await, and we can't wait to share them. Until next time, walk with courage. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.